So this was actually going to be just a straight up side-by-side comparison of Hyper-G and Hyper-G Soft. But the thing is, I've watched these comparisons online before, and I've never been able to come away with a solid conclusion. So what gives? On one hand, Hyper-G Soft is basically the same thing as its regular version. It's just a bit softer, so you get a bit more power and comfort. Well, if that's the case, then why not just string regular Hyper-G at a lower tension? On the other hand, it's a completely different string. It just happens to look the same and be packaged the same. Well, if that's the case, then why didn't Solinco just release this as a different string altogether? At the end of the day, the unfortunate reality is that there are way too many factors that affect your perception of the string. Is your racket beam on the thin side or the thick side? Is the beam thickness constant, or does the racket flex in some weird way as intended by the manufacturer? Likely not. Would that affect your perception? Of course. Would you be able to perceive the difference? Maybe. Does your racket have some vibration dampening technology? Do you use a leather or synthetic grip? Is your synthetic grip cushioned? Is your racket head heavy? Head light? It's enough to make anyone's mind explode, which is why I don't think you'll see a ton of racket reviews here on this channel unless I'm really interested in making a switch. Yes, rackets are important, but I think once you're mostly happy, what you should really focus on is your string setup. And even more importantly, focus on your own game. The racket doesn't swing itself. So, given what I've said so far, here's what we're going to do today. And this is really a result of a happy accident, and it gave me far more insight than I had originally intended to get. I've got two rackets. This is the Bolt 98 Lite V1, and this is the Bolt 100 Lite V1. They're essentially the same solid feeling sticks, barring three things: their beam thicknesses, their head sizes, and their string patterns. The 98 Lite is the control frame. It's got the thinner beam, the 18x20 string pattern, and a 98 square inch head size. The 100 Lite is the power frame. It's got the thicker beam, the 16x19 string pattern, and a 100 square inch head size. I've put regular Hyper-G 16L in the power frame, and I've put the soft Hyper-G 18 gauge in the control frame. You see where I'm going with this, right? You give up some power and spin with the regular Hyper-G and a thicker gauge in the power frame, and you get that back with the softer string in a thinner gauge, but then the power frame kind of makes up for the lack of power, and the control frame makes up for the excess power you would get with the softer string. So all you're really left with is the inherent softness of the string. And this brings me to the tensions, which are of course not the same. Wait, what? Now this is where we talk about the happy accident. Both these rackets were supposed to be strung up at 45 pounds, and they were, but I strung up the power frame first and ended up playing with it for 5 hours. Why? Because sometimes life gets in the way. I have a full-time job, you know. By the time I got on court to compare these two side by side, the 16L was at 35 pounds, and then the soft at 18 gauge was around 42 pounds. And I measured these tensions using this thing. This, I realized at the time, is actually a great thing because I have a bias for softer string setups. So the question now really becomes, does the inherently softer string in a thinner gauge feel better? Does Hyper-G Soft actually bring anything to the table that you can't get with the regular version by just lowering the tension? Nope. No, it doesn't. I actually ended up preferring the regular Hyper-G at lower tension. This thing felt amazing. It was soft, it was buttery, it had lots of pop, lots of ball pocketing, it had amazing dwell time on the racket. And that's exactly what I want out of my string bed. This was all the good things I associate with Hyper-G, but with none of the downsides that people like me sometimes complain about, which is the excessive firmness or harshness that the string bed sometimes gives. And I know, this is supposed to be a soft string, but it is not. It's a polyester, it's stiff, it's meant to be stiff. It just happens to be one of the least stiffest strings in Solinco's lineup. And I think it's important to bear that in mind when playing with polyester string setups. I could easily flatten out my balls or brush up just a little or a lot at that last second, allowing me to hit a crazy variety of balls. And that's all driven by that amazing ball pocketing and dwell time on the racket that makes it feel like the string bed is really gripping and clawing at that ball. It feels like that the string bed really cups the balls, and it gives you just that fraction of a second more to put as much action on the ball as possible. Another thing that felt amazing, drop shots. Maybe it's just me, but that deeper ball pocketing makes it feel like that ball pocketing varies more across the string bed. So when trying to hit a drop shot, I can make contact with the string bed just a bit lower than where the sweet spot would normally be, and that deader response gives me a lot more control than I would have normally gotten with this loose of a tension. And in my case, I do tend to make contact with the string bed lower than I normally would when hitting drop shots. I actually learned this from playing squash, where the mains tend to be quite long, so there's a lot of variability in the response you get from the string bed from the very tip of the racket to the very bottom. And here, I tend to hit my drop shots very close to around this area of the racket. And I think the real reason drop shots feel so good with a setup like this is because at that lower tension, the string bed still stays quite lively, so I get great feel. Seriously, man. I could hit drop shots with this all day. What I absolutely hated with the 16L was that bulky, dense feeling of the string bed. Despite the soft ball pocketing that seemed to grip the ball, I kept yearning for more. Like, I knew it was possible to potentially get more. I constantly felt like the ball was sliding on the string bed. Like, a good analogy is like if you rubbed soap on the string and the whole string bed got slippery. And this is a very good point to talk about Hyper-G Soft. How I thought you were going to be the better one. So there's only two things that stuck out here. The first is just how much the ball was gripped by this thinner gauge. Everything that felt wrong with the 16L felt better with this softer, thinner gauge. And the second thing is that, at least to me, the string tension seems to matter way more than the inherent softness of the string. No matter how cleanly I hit the ball, the relative higher tension here made me want to keep going back to that lower tension one. Now, this should not be a surprise to me. My string journey with squash led me to progressively lower tension and softer strings, and funnily enough, stiffer and lighter frames. This kind of reminds me of a video I saw on this channel called Intuitive Tennis. I'm not going to go into this today, but I'll leave the link to that video in the description below for you to mull over. I think the real question is, if I keep playing with this softer string, and as it loses tension, am I going to end up preferring this over the regular Hyper-G? I'll need some real self-control to not pick up the other frame. I think I'm just going to leave it at home. It's the only realistic way to not touch that lower tension frame. Yeah. Okay. So the tension here is now around 35 pounds. Honestly, I'm splitting hairs. It doesn't feel that significantly different. If I'm to be perfectly honest, I think it feels a little bit more muted compared to the regular Hyper G. So yeah, I think I would much rather prefer the regular Hyper G at just a lower tension, but in a thinner gauge, so I could get some of that gripping qualities I experienced with the softer Hyper G. For me, it really came down to the fact that the softer version felt just a little bit muted, and it really didn't offer me anything that the regular didn't give me. You know what I really wish Solinco would come out with? A rough version of Hyper G. That would be amazing. Anywho, that's all I have to say. I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, editing Ramiz here. I just wanted to make a quick apology. The audio here is not good. I messed up, but thanks for watching. It'll be better next time, okay?